This week on Inside Athletic Training and the Tales of the Tape series, we share our final installment of the Youth Arm Health and Sports Specialization series. Today on the show, we welcome in Keith Duggar, the Colorado Rockies Senior Director of Sports Medicine and Head Athletic Trainer. Keith is incredibly passionate about youth arm health and sports specialization and also leads Major League Baseball's Pitch Smart Committee, in which USA Baseball and Major League Baseball team up to help young players reduce arm injuries by providing a comprehensive resource for safe pitching practices. Now let's get into the show with Keith Duggar and our host, Corey Tremble.
Welcome to Inside Athletic Training and another installment of Tales of the Tape. Today we're joined by longtime head athletic trainer and director of sports medicine for the Colorado Rockies, Keith Duggar. Most of us in the game know him as Doogie, so if you hear me go in and out of calling him that, that's why we're doing so. So a few have shown the passion for health at the youth athlete level as Doogie has, and that also led him to the appointment of being included on MLB's Pitch Smart Advisory Committee. But we're very excited and honored to have Doogie join us today. So Keith, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Corey. I'm excited to be here, talk a little bit about Pitch Smart and the youth.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, before we dive into Pitch Smart, I want to really get into that in a little bit. But let's start with kind of where your passion for helping the youth athlete started and when you really started seeing this youth athlete injury crisis pick up, in your opinion.
Yeah, I would say that I've always been intrigued a little bit with kind of up and coming new injuries that we were starting to see almost 15, 20 years ago. We started to see, besides just the common injuries, the little league elbow, little league shoulder injuries, we started seeing, what we're talking about today is UCL injuries in these preteen kids and teen kids and people that haven't, matured. And, why was it? Why was this happening? And that kind of opened my eyes to, kind of look into what was being done, how kids were being used in the game, how they're being developed. And, I'm an ask question type of guy, and I asked a lot of questions, and, if there was anything I could get involved in to help, that's kind of how I threw my name in the hat or with advisory committee. As, I was one of these guys that wasn't afraid to ask questions or challenge coaches in some of the teachings of these young kids. And, I have kids myself, and I had a young son coming up, and I just wanted to make sure that he was going to be in a healthy environment as he was coming up.
Yeah, that's some great points there. And you bring up that your own son is obviously a very high level collegiate athlete right now, playing baseball for UCLA. So how did you navigate, his youth career and also kind of practice what you preached, and maybe took a step back from being a clinician and, stepped into his father and vice versa? How did you kind of navigate those waters and maybe help other parents understand what you were seeing at the professional level and also what you were seeing as a father?
Yeah. First of all, I got to admit, it wasn't easy, being a parent of a modern athlete, whether kids playing baseball, soccer, football, it's become specialized at every level. Usually around 12 years old, these kids are specialized in their one sport. So, I wanted my own son, to compete with the best and have the opportunity. But at the same time, I understood what if he was only looking forward to that one sport, how it might affect him in the future. So basically, we always are preaching, let's be a balanced athlete. Let's try and play as many sports as we can when they're young. And then when the time's right, then you can consolidate and go more specialized, in your later years of high school. But in those primary growth years, let's say 12 to 16, I think kids should play multiple sports. I think they should have breaks. I think they should be careful of overtraining and trying to compete up with the Joneses. I think the biggest thing we have going right now is, our development plan of baseball is still an evolution. We're still working on it. Other sports like soccer, even volleyball, they've had development plans for a long time. USA Baseball has done a great job actually coming up with a development plan, but I don't think it's set in stone right now. I still think there's evolution of, things that have to change in this game for the safety and for the future of the sport. So, I'm intrigued of how we can change it. I don't want to offend people with some of my ideas that I bring forward. I'm not picking on any one group, one coach, or one clinic or, therapy center. We are always trying to look at it as a whole for the athlete, right? We want them to be able to come through their high school years healthy, be able to go into college and not worry about injury, and in the future, possibly make it to the professional level. We started a combine, what I think we're going on our 4th year, 3 full years now. And we're seeing trends of injuries that are different than even 5 years ago. So these are things that when I was talking about evolution of a development plan, we have to look what the answer, what is really happening to these athletes. Is it because they're training differently? Is it because they're specialized too early? Is it because they're specialized in one position too early? So, example, are they specializing at pitching at 10 years old, and that's the only thing they do? They're not playing the infield, not playing the outfield. I think we have to look at that. I think all the guidelines that we were laying out in PitchSmart, which we'll get to a little bit later, that are just ideas, right? And we want people to think common sense approach to this. If a kid is burnt out training 4 hours a day, even in the off season, we know that car can't be driven at that high velocity for too long. And that's basically what has happened to some of our youth. The bigger, stronger kids were, I don't want to say being abused, but they're being used too much. And then, the recourse of that is the breakdown of the injuries. And that's when you have real smart group on the advisory committee that are, hey, we got to do something about it.
Oh, for sure. Let's talk about PitchSmart a little bit. It's always been kind of the athletic trainer's mantra to be in the background and kind of stay in the shadows and don't be seen, don't be heard. We're just here to make sure the players get out there. But I feel like more and more, especially in today's world, our voice does have a lot of weight, and it should, because we're seeing these things on the front lines, and we're there to try to help mitigate some of these issues. So how did your role as being head athletic trainer for a Major League Baseball team, the Colorado Rockies, how did you were you approached by PitchSmart to join this group, or did you feel like, hey, this is something that I have passion about, I want to get involved, and I'm going to make a stand and have a voice?
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways I got involved. One, I'd always been intrigued with, the scouting world too, right? And the biggest scouting world in baseball at that point in time was, associated with USA Baseball. So I kind of threw my name in the hat with USA Baseball when they started to do some assessment testing on what they were looking at. And before they even wrote their development plan, I got actually to be on their advisory committee for that. And I was kind of the liaison with Mark O'Neill and maybe a couple other guys with USA Baseball's original development plan. And again, like you said, Corey, we are on the ground floor. We see this happening. We see what we're dealing with. These surgeons and doctors and therapists are smart cats, but they're not dealing with this daily. They also don't have the how do I say this? They see a player or a parent once a week, where we see these players every single day, right? We know the players, we know the youth, we know who's coming in to the professional system a little bit better than the physicians and some of the therapists. And, I think our history of what we've learned as a whole and sharing amongst our peers is vital as anything. I think if you talk to any of the great orthopedists that are on the advisory committee, they're going to say the people that do the work are the athletic trainers, because we're the ones coming up with the ideas. We're the one that's bringing it to the forefront. We might not be the ones to be able to write the papers and present it, in the scientific world, but we're coming up with the ideas. And we're also not afraid to challenge some of the people that disagree with us, meaning if that's a coach, if that's another physician. And I think in the athletic training world, we've learned from our failures, right? I think that's very important. So we've learned what has failed for us and what doesn't work. And we talk about that more than even doctors and therapists do. So we've talked about how we failed on rehab programs. We failed when guys had, a surgery. And when you're not afraid to talk about your failures, you're going to move forward. So I think there's a group of us, and I include you, I'd say everyone involved in PPATs, we have a little edge, which is nice. We're not trying to promote ourselves at all, but we want people to understand that there is people that know quite a bit about what's going on, and we're the insiders. I guess that's the best way to say it. We are the insiders of kind of what is happening or our baseball society right now.
That's a great term to use. We are the insiders, and again, all of these physicians and physical therapists, they do lean on us because we're the ones that are in the trenches and player facing every day. Looking at PitchSmart specifically, I just want to make sure for our audience that they know exactly what this is that we keep bringing up. So it's the program that Major League Baseball and USA Baseball have created to help young players reduce arm injuries by providing a comprehensive research for safe pitching practices. This is led by some of the greatest minds in sports medicine and injury prevention, like Dr. Andrews, Dr. Elatrosh, Dr. Ahmad, Keith Duggar. PitchSmart has become the gold standard for resources for parents, coaches, and players. So, you gave us a little bit of a background on how you got involved and why you got involved. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the work that PitchSmart has done and kind of the big landmark practices that they have put out for our youth athletes?
Yeah, so basically I'll go back to the original USA Baseball developmental plan. So based off that developmental plan, they still felt like they needed more in the medical world, in the science world. So that's when they got this other group of compliant advisors for them. And that's how I got on board. That's how Ken Crenshaw, Dr. Ahmad, Dr. Andrews. I mean, there's Stan Conte was on the forefront of that, Glenn Flessick. There was all kinds of different people that were just kind of throwing ideas at. And then we all kind of had, multiple meetings during years before we even came up with something. We know that you can't just come in and change the history of the game, even at the youth level. But what we were trying to do is give them some basic guidelines, some, what do you want to call it? I don't want to call it rules, but a compliance, so you're not abusing, a young player that might be playing on 3 different travel teams, right? And nobody is keeping track of how many pitches a kid has been throwing or how many at bats. And that's where I think there's still improvement, even in PitchSmart and in this developmental plan. I think in soccer, the kids have ID numbers and they're follow their whole career path if they're, kind of elite level. Baseball, we're not there yet. I think eventually you'll start seeing this at a youth level, meaning 12 years old, where, whether you're using a computer device to keep score, game changer, I'm just throwing different groups out there. And you can kind of see that, hey, this kid played on this team this day, maybe on the next weekend he played on another team. So there isn't that loss, right? That transition of that kid getting lost in the system. And, that's going to be with the next phases, I'd say, of PitchSmart. But going back to what exactly PitchSmart is too, we wanted to educate. That was our number one principle. We wanted to educate parents first and foremost. We wanted to educate players of some of the risk factors that they're starting to get into. Then we want to educate coaches. We want to educate administrators. We want to educate physical therapists, athletic trainers, and orthopedists. And without offending people, we wanted to just have a common sense approach with some basic guidelines, some things that we all believed in that, shouldn't be abused. And, and that's kind of how it came to the forefront. And again, like I said, it's still changing. We're still coming up with ideas, but the compliance factor has been wonderful. That has helped us. Now, as saying a specific pitch count, the absolute best thing, you're going to have old schoolers argue against you. You're going to have new schoolers argue against you. And the same thing with some of the rehab programs or exercises that we're showing. They're just basic things so people can go towards. Everybody is on a different throwing program. There's not a cookie cutter approach for each kid, even at 10 years old, based on their maturation. That's one of the hardest things that baseball, I still think, has to look at a little bit. When we start putting numbers on kids at a young age, right? They're training for those assessment numbers. They're not training for the game. That's one of my frustrations with putting ranking numbers at a 12-year-old, right? So the highest guy on a ranking is going to be the strongest guy, right? That might be a year and a half in the same grade difference. So that being said, it's tough because that's how the recruiting world started looking at rankings of kids too, right? They're like, well, this guy's really ranked high in this specific group, so he must be a super stud. But what they don't realize is on the growth chart, this kid is way behind everybody else. So if you do have a good developmental plan and an ID structure where you can follow these guys along their path of their career, you could see how it's a stepping stone versus one kid that maybe was shot to the top from 12 to 14. Now he's spiking downward where everyone else is catching up, right? And that's important to me. And not just only here in the United States, these guidelines are for the growth of the sport worldwide. So this isn't only compliance in, Little League baseball, college baseball, some of the big showcase type of groups. This is also worldwide. In Japan and Korea, they're starting to do it too, where, they were way on the other end of the spectrum and throw more, do more. And what we found out is they were just having as many injuries as we were, right? So there's not a perfect way. And it's an evolution. It's a science. It's changing all the time. So that's where I think we got to bring more creative people in to watch and look and do research papers to look at what's going on with these sports. One of the big things that we started seeing the last few years is all these growth plate injuries. So why are these kids getting growth plate injuries? Well, we're making them stronger, we're making them faster, but the bones aren't developed, right? So, they're getting these injuries to these growth plates. And now when 15, 16 years old, they're being shut down. But the abuse, I don't want to call it abuse, the damage is done between that 12 and 13. And the same thing, sometimes we get guys in pro ball or, a young kid in Latin America that throws 96 miles per hour, but his growth plate is all flared up. He's got bone edema. He might have avulsions, stress reaction fractures. And if you don't give that enough time to heal, there's major damage down the road, right? There's going to be major damage down the road. I think other doctors that are involved in the professional sports are being outspoken right now about, some of the injuries that we're seeing, the increase in injuries. And they're right. We do have to kind of be on the forefront of saying, hey, we got to be careful here. And part of that next step in pitch smart and developmental plans is what can we change, right? What can you provide to a young coach, that's going to help the 15-year-old to 18-year-old over the next 3 years in his high school career. And, I imagine the next 2 years, we're going to have a whole nother list of ideas that we can provide for parents, coaches, trainers, and therapists.
Yeah, that's just some amazing work that obviously Pitch Smart is doing, and your thoughts on where things are going and how we can hopefully curtail some of these injuries is pretty paramount to kind of peeling back some of this crisis that we're currently on. So, I know to a man and woman in professional baseball in the sports medicine field, anytime that there's somebody that that has a child that has an injury, they're always coming to you saying, hey, can you take a look at my kid? There's his shoulder sore after pitching, his elbow sore after pitching, what have you. What's the message that you have with that player, with that parent, because I'm sure a lot of the times they're looking for Doogie to come in and save the day and say, oh, your kid's going to be fine. But I think they get their hair blown back a little bit when we start giving them some of the honesty and the facts at the back end. So what's that conversation like? And do you utilize a lot of the Pitch Smart data and research that you guys have put together in order to have that message heard?
I think you hit the nail on the head. As athletic trainers in professional baseball, I think every parent, every teammate's parent, every coach that, our kids have been involved in, think we have the answers for everything. First and foremost, as the youth, this is a game. We need to make it fun for the kids. This isn't a paid profession at 10 to 16 years old. We have to be very careful of not burning out these kids. We have to be careful of not overtraining these kids. That's one thing I'd say to the parents and the coaches is let these kids have fun, right? And if that means they don't have to play on the highest club travel team around the country, then, let's do that. The kids will direct what direction they want to go based on their work, right? And when I say you don't have to make them a professional athlete, and I'm not criticizing these other entities, meaning, strength trainers, therapists, pitching clinics, they all have their place. But a kid doesn't need to go one day to a strength coach, one day to my athletic trainer, one day to my nutritionist, one day to my sprint running coach at 12 years old. I guarantee you my big league players are going to be burnt out if they have to do that, right? And you almost have to have the parents take a step back to look at it that way, right? Like hey, maybe Jimmy needs just a breather here. Maybe that's the best recourse, that break in the off season, October, November, a good couple months off. Go play basketball or do whatever, just be a kid. And that will revitalize that kid and re-energize him to get better. It's when I came up in sport, my dad was a coach, right? Coach football, baseball. I played 4 or 5 sports in high school. I would consider myself one of those well-rounded athletes, but I was a fortunate athlete because I got to do everything I loved. I looked forward to every seasonal sport, right? Like I was ready when football was over to go into basketball. When basketball was on the tail end, I was ready to play baseball. Now in high schools, they're forcing some of these kids to really have to dig into one sport. And, some of them, maybe that's the path they chose and they want to do. But there was plenty of kids that want to be this well-rounded sport. But because of their coaches and administrators at certain levels, they're not allowed to do that. Or even if a kid is signed on early on, which I think I'm going to give credit to the NCAA and to baseball of now kids can't sign to go to colleges till after their junior year, right? Whereas kids were signing at 14 years old and then, no wonder they were overtraining, right? Because they wanted to be the biggest, strongest kid in the world at 14 years old because my son's 4 teammates signed a college commit, but my son was, on the lower side that wasn't ready for a college commit. So, by just delaying that signability, now we're allowing some of that growth of those kids to kind of get evened out a little bit more. And maybe we'll start to see a little, downplay in some other type of specific injuries.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it pretty hard right there with keeping the fun and the excitement of playing sport in our youth athletes' minds at all times. I mean, when you look at everybody that when they bring up who's the greatest all-around athlete of all time, a lot of people say Bo Jackson, and that's the reason because he played in the NFL and Major League Baseball, and there was only one way he could do that, and that was not specializing early. And everyone just always talks about Bo and what he did as an athlete. So you make a great point on making sure that we're pushing our youth to go have fun and enjoy what you enjoy. And finally, I want to wrap up with one last question for you. And, obviously this is a PBATS podcast, and we would be remiss if we didn't give you the opportunity to point out some of the work that PBATS has done to help MLB's Pitch Smart along, and also just in general through Play Campaign and other areas where PBATS has been at the forefront on trying to curtail some of these youth injuries.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to our peer group, PBATS. I think we're on the forefront of all professional athletic trainers of kind of promoting and educating not only athletic trainers, but parents, like you talked about, coaches. We're not afraid to jump and get involved, whether that's a campaign against spit tobacco, whether it's juvenile diabetes, the lack of physical education, broaden the horizon on steroid use among the youth, more society issues. I think we're not only voices for baseball, we are kind of voices of society. Our professional athletes are just a small peer group of society, right? And when we see what's coming on and the pressures that these kids are going through, sometimes they don't know how to communicate to others about what they're dealing with. We might be the point person, the big brother. I always tell people we're great gatekeepers, meaning that we can refer to people if we don't know the answer. I don't pretend ever to know every answer, but I promise you I'll do my best to help a parent, to help a kid, to help a player find an answer that might help them, right? And I think our group, PBATS, with our education-based society, we promote that better than anyone. And I think other professional groups and I think young students coming out of school see that from our group, our peer group. And that's why a lot of times these people want to be part of our professional society.
Thank you, Doogie, for your time today. I know you got a game tonight, so we don't want to keep you too long here, but we do appreciate your insight and all the work you've done to help with the youth injury crisis.
Corey, I appreciate you even asking me to be on it. It's an honor just to even talk about it. As you can tell, I'm passionate just like you are. And it's just you and I that's talking right now. But there is, we got 30 teams of groups of us out here. And, there are some really good young athletic trainers that, maybe if a parent or a young coach just wants to pick their ear, we actually like that. We get our payment back to us is kind of how we can fulfill others' dreams and help them out. That's the biggest part of my job is the fulfillment of helping others. And I think that's what our whole society is based on.
Thank you for tuning in to PBAT's Tales of the Tape series on the Youth Arm Health Epidemic. For more information, please visit pbats.com or Major League Baseball's website, mlb.com/pitchsmart.